We have everything up and ready to go for today's web event, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So again, welcome to everyone who's joined us today for the OJJDP Fiscal Year 2021 Strategies to Support Children Exposed to Violence. My name is William Moore with OJJDP's INTAC, and before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items to keep in mind. Please note for those who are attending today, today's web event is a webinar to go over the grant solicitation strategies to support children exposed to violence. Please note that this webinar will not cover the content of strategies to support children exposed to violence, but instead will go over the grant solicitation that is released for individuals looking to apply to this specific solicitation that is released. Please note that we are indeed recording today's web event. Past events are archived on OJJDP's multimedia page. If you would like to get supporting materials, please contact the OJJDP TTA Help Desk, and we'll be more than happy to get those supporting materials to you. If you're having trouble downloading any event materials that we've released today or I've shared with you all today, please view the chat for a Google Drive link that will allow for you to access the event material. If you click on the link and it does not launch for you, simply copy and paste the link into a web browser, and it should let you view those materials and download them accordingly. If any of the issues persist, please be sure to contact us at the help desk, and we'll be more than happy to help you get access to that PowerPoint PDF. For optimal audio, we ask that you please dial out through the WebEx system to your phone line. When you're connected, you will see a phone icon to appear next to your name in the participants panel. Please note that all participants have come in on mute, and you will remain on mute during today's web event. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, please be sure to send me, the webinar host, a private chat, and I'll be more than happy to help you. During today's web event, our presenter will take questions, live questions from the audience. To send your question, please go to the chat window. In the chat location, type your question that you have. However, before you send, go to the to feature there and make sure you select either everyone or all panelists. Again, before you send your question, be sure to select everyone or all panelists in the drop-down and then hit send or enter to send in your question. And we'll repeat that in the chat today for those who have joined us. Now, help us count. Again, go to the chat window and type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. If you're viewing by yourself, there's no need to type anything at this time. However, if you're viewing as a group, additional or multiple people are with you, please go to the chat window and send to everyone or all panelists the total number of additional people that are in the room with you today, not including yourself. That being said, I would like to turn over today's web event to our presenter, Leonora, to cover today's web content on this grant solicitation. Leonora, whenever you're ready, I have passed the presentation to you, and feel free to take it away.
Thank you, William. Again, my name is Leonora Fleming, and I'm a program manager with the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention within the Special Victims and Violent Offenders Division. And I'll be managing the FY 2021 Strategies to Support Children Exposed to Violence program. Before we start, I want to extend my sincere gratitude to each of you today for taking the time out of your schedules to participate in this webinar, especially those who are participating in this webinar for the second time. As many of you know, the solicitation was removed a couple months ago so that changes could be made to the language that align more with the new administration's priority on community violence intervention and youth violence reduction. So again, thank you all for spending the next hour with us today, as it really shows your dedication to your communities and to the field. So we'll start with a copy of the Office of Justice Programs organizational chart. As you can see, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, OJJDP, is housed under the umbrella agency of the Office of Justice Programs, OJP. OJP is the program side of the house and consists of 6 program offices, including the Bureau of Justice Assistance, the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the National Institute of Justice, OJJDP, the Office for Victims of Crime, and the Office of Sex Offender Sentencing, Monitoring, Apprehending, Registering, and Tracking, also known as the SMART Office. Here at OJJDP, we envision a nation where our children are free from crime and violence, and if they come into contact with the justice system, the contact should be both just and beneficial. So as you can see, there are 2 components to our name that we focus on: juvenile justice and delinquency prevention. OJJDP provides national leadership, coordination, and resources to prevent and respond to juvenile delinquency and victimization. By supporting state, local communities, and tribal jurisdictions in their efforts to develop and implement effective programs for juveniles, our office strives to strengthen the juvenile justice system's efforts to protect public safety, hold offenders accountable, and provide services that address the needs of youth and their families, along with empowering them to live productive and law-abiding lives. So here's the agenda for today and the items that we will cover. Again, this webinar will discuss the FY 2021 strategies to support children exposed to violence solicitation. The purpose of today's webinar is to provide you with a general overview of the solicitation. In addition, I will briefly review the solicitation requirements and highlight resources and tools available to help you in your application process. My hope is that after learning more about this opportunity, that you are clear on if you are eligible to apply, and if so, that you have a better understanding of the application process. There will be time for a few questions at the end of the presentation today. We have a number of attendees, so it is not likely that I will get to everyone's questions, but I will do my best to answer as many as I can, especially the ones that we received in advance. I would like to note that after this webinar, you will have full access to our response center. William put the number and email in the beginning of the presentation, and I will close my presentation with that information as well. They will answer all of your questions. So if there are any programmatic questions, the response center will reach out to me directly so I can help them triage the questions and get responses back to you. So please know this is not your one-stop shop to ask questions. Here is the link to the solicitation. If you haven't downloaded it already, I advise you to do so since it has been modified. I know if this is your first time submitting a federal application, it can be a little overwhelming with all of the requirements and submission pieces. So this webinar, again, is to help walk you through the solicitation and the application process, and hopefully in turn make it a little easier on you. The number one thing to remember is the deadline. And this year we have 2 deadlines to remember, as applications will be submitted to DOJ in a new 2-step process. Applicants will need to submit an SF-424 form and an SFLLL or lobbying form in grants.gov by June 22nd. And then applicants will submit the full application, including all attachments, in Just Grants by July 6th. To be considered timely, the full application must be submitted in Just Grants by the Just Grants application deadline. We really encourage applicants to submit their applications at least 72 hours prior to the due date to account for any technical issues that may need to be addressed when you are submitting your application. Applicant eligibility. So this is an open and competitive solicitation. As we see a large number of attendees on this webinar, this topic is one that is of dire need and interest in our field, so this will definitely be competitive. There are 2 categories of funding available under the solicitation. Category 1 is for project sites, and Category 2 is for a training and technical assistance provider. It's important to note that OJJDP will consider applications under which 2 or more entities would carry out the federal award. However, only one entity may be the applicant who will have primary responsibility for carrying out the award. We encourage partnerships, but there should be one entity taking responsibility for all administration and financial management of the program. Eligible applicants are limited to state government, city or township government, public and state-controlled institutions of higher education, county government, independent school districts, Native American tribal governments that are federally recognized, as well as Native American tribal organizations other than federally recognized tribal governments. Nonprofits with or without having a 501c3 status with the IRS other than institutions of higher education, as well as private institutions of higher education. For the purposes of this solicitation, state means any state of the United States, the District of Columbia, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, Guam, American Samoa, and the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. Please remember, all recipients and subrecipients, including for-profit organizations, must forego any profit or management fee. This solicitation provides funding for communities to develop and provide support services for children exposed to violence, as well as training and technical assistance to child and family serving organizations to help them better recognize and help families at risk for violence. Funding under Category 1 project sites can be used to develop and/or enhance support services for children exposed to violence in their homes, schools, and communities, and to develop, enhance, and implement community violence intervention strategies, such as community-based gun violence interventions, like street outreach, violence interrupters, group violence intervention, and hospital-based violence interventions that really focus on addressing juvenile delinquency and crime through informed approaches. These approaches can also include efforts to build trust between youth, the community, and law enforcement. Applicants using CVI strategies will receive priority consideration. Funding under Category 2 supports the delivery of training and technical assistance to the funded Category 1 project sites, as well as general training activities that focus on exposure to violence, as well as youth violence prevention and intervention. Children exposed to violence are youth 17 and younger who are direct victims or witnesses to violence in their homes, school, or community. Eligible applicants for Category 1 that propose to provide direct services to youth cannot include youth who are 18 and older. Now, what does that mean if you are providing direct services to a youth who is 16 or 17 and then turns 18 during the grant period and you are still providing those direct services? Absolutely, they would stay in the program in which the funding is being used. It just cannot be targeted to those youth who are 18 and older. We expect to make 7 awards for Category 1 project sites of $930,000 and 1 award for Category 2 training and technical assistance provider of $500,000 for a 3-year project period starting October 1. It is important to know that when you are thinking about and submitting your budget, how you will structure your program proposal. So for Category 1, it is $930,000 across 3 years. And for Category 2, it is $500,000 across 3 years. So the total amount of your request should not exceed these numbers for each category. You do not need to divide the money equally for each year. If you think that your program may need more money up front or more in implementation in the middle, you can do so. The money just needs to be spread out logically across those 3 years and not to exceed that maximum dollar amount. We are seeking proposals from applicants to support the overall goal of the program, which is to build the capacity of families and communities to help children exposed to violence. Applicants should propose programs in their local communities that meet the following important objectives: improving family and community responses to children exposed to violence, increasing protective factors to prevent juvenile violence, delinquency, and victimization, and supporting communities to develop, design, and deliver prevention and intervention strategies to support children exposed to violence. All of these objectives should be addressed within your application. Deliverables. Each category for the solicitation has a set of deliverables that applicants should do and propose in their applications with the grant funding. For Category 1, project sites can use funding to support any or all of the following: enhance and/or develop supportive services for children exposed to violence in their homes, schools, and communities, develop community-based violence prevention and intervention approaches that address risk factors and build on protective factors to reduce juvenile delinquency and crime in areas with high exposure to violence, as well as provide direct person-to-person outreach strategies to increase awareness and build the capacity of families and communities to help children exposed to violence. In order to be successful in addressing issues related to children exposed to violence, it is important for communities to build a comprehensive approach that will maximize existing and new resources. Category 1 applicants are required to propose and undertake their work through a multidisciplinary team of stakeholders. This can be an existing collaborative group or one formed specifically for this project. A description of the team structure must be referenced in the proposal narrative and submitted as an attachment labeled Planning Team. I will reiterate that it is important that you are working with a multidisciplinary team on these issues. However that makes sense to your local problem, to your local issues that you are trying to solve with this funding, but it takes multiple stakeholders. This planning team should meet regularly throughout the project period to identify and address service gaps and barriers and create a blueprint for a comprehensive network of services for children exposed to violence and their families, build the capacity of communities to help children exposed to violence, and prevent and reduce juvenile violent crime. Again, think of this team as more of a leadership team examining and instituting systems of change in the community, essentially looking to see how policies and procedures can be improved to address the needs of children exposed to violence and their families. Letters of commitment and/or MOUs are not required for the multidisciplinary team. If you have them, that's great, but you are not required to submit them with your application for the solicitation. Category 2 applicant deliverables include developing technical assistance plans for each site, providing targeted content training to project site staff to increase their capacity to implement strategies to address issues related to children exposed to violence, as well as youth violence prevention and intervention, establish tools and techniques for working across different disciplines to facilitate information sharing and communication, facilitate peer-to-peer information sharing and learning communities between the sites to promote problem solving and innovation, plan and coordinate in conjunction with OJJDP annual cross-site meetings on-site if possible or web-based of project site grantees, as well as develop and deliver general training activities focused on exposure to violence, as well as youth violence prevention and intervention, and building trust between youth, the community, and law enforcement. Lastly, the TTA provider will collaborate with OJJDP and the training and technical assistance provider that is funded under our other solicitation, Comprehensive Youth Violence Prevention and Reduction Program solicitation, and planning a targeted event focused on the nexus between children exposed to violence and youth violence prevention and intervention. Again, OJJDP expects Category 1 program sites to work closely with the Category 2 funded training and technical assistance provider. Successful applicants are expected to participate in an up to 3-day cross-site meeting in each year of the project and budget for as many as 3 representatives to travel to attend these meetings. This schedule is subject to change over the course of the award. Okay, so now that we have a basic understanding of the requirements of the solicitation and background on what we are looking for, I will dive into the grant application process. I know this can look a little overwhelming, but the purpose of this webinar is to ease that stress and help you digest everything you will need to do to submit a comprehensive and thorough application. What an application should include. It's a lot, so I will go through each one in just a second, but I do want to highlight OJP's Grant Application Resource Guide, which serves as a vital tool as you are filling your application out and developing your proposal. There are links throughout the entire solicitation to give guidance in specific areas, but the resource guide gives a general overview of everything that you are going to need. Again, it is linked within the solicitation, and hopefully it won't be too difficult or confusing once we go through a discussion of everything. The following application elements must be included in the application submission to meet the basic minimum requirements, or BMR, to advance to peer review and receive consideration for funding. So this will include the proposal abstract, proposal narrative, and budget worksheet and budget narrative. The SF-424 is a required standard form. This is a cover sheet for submission of all applications in OJP. It is completed through grants.gov, and again, it is just your basic information, your title, the title of the project, and funding requested. It will be at the very beginning of your application process. The standard applicant information section of the Just Grants application is pre-populated with the SF-424 data submitted in grants.gov. Applicants will need to review the standard applicant information in Just Grants and make edits as needed. Within this section, applicants will need to add zip codes for areas affected by the project, confirm their authorized representative, and also verify the organization's legal name and address. The proposal abstract. So this should be a brief summary of the program in 400 words or less. The abstract is written in general terms and should describe your project purpose, the population you will be serving, and the activities you will be implementing to achieve your goals and objectives. This is what would be public-facing if you were awarded. This will be completed in Just Grants as a web-based form, not as a separate attachment as in previous years. Again, this solicitation is really competitive, and we are only making 7 awards for Category 1 and 1 award for Category 2. So why are we so structured on page limits? That is the why, to keep the review uniform for us. So please submit a proposal narrative that is extremely thorough and detailed. Detail your purpose, the goals and objectives, the strategies, the design and management of your proposed program. This is what needs to be double-spaced, 1-inch margins, not exceeding 30 pages, using 12-point font, preferably Times New Roman. If the proposal narrative fails to comply with the page restrictions, we may consider the non-compliance in the peer review and final award decision. This is very competitive, so please do your best to comply with all of the requirements. So now we will dive into the different sections required for your proposal narrative. Description of the issue. Applicants in both categories should briefly describe the nature and scope of the problem that the program will address. Applicants should use data to provide evidence that the problem exists, demonstrate the size and scope of the problem, and document the effects of the problem on the target population and the larger community. Any data or research referenced in the narrative should include information about the source of the data and/or a citation. Applicants should describe the target population and any previous or current attempts to address the problem, as well as identify current gaps in programming and services. Category 2 applicants must also present a clear understanding of issues pertaining to developing and implementing multifaceted intervention programs that serve the target populations identified in the solicitation, and detail how targeted training and technical assistance can address these issues. Project design and implementation. This is where you will detail how the project will operate throughout the funding period and describe the strategies you will use to achieve your goals and objectives. We do not require a funding match with this solicitation, but if you plan to include any resources like cash or in-kind to support this project, detail them in this section and discuss your plan for sustainability beyond the grant period. We do like to see whatever you are proposing sustaining once federal funding is no longer available and what exactly your plans are for that. Applicants should submit a realistic timeline that assigns responsibility for each task and plots completion of each task by month or quarter for the duration of the award. The timeline should be submitted as a separate attachment. Under the Capabilities and Competencies section, applicants should describe their experience and capability as an organization, as well as that of any contractors or subgrantees the applicant will use to implement and manage this effort. Applicants should highlight any previous experience implementing projects of similar design or magnitude. In addition, you will need to describe the roles and responsibilities of all project staff and explain the program's organizational structure and operations. Management and staffing patterns should clearly be connected to the project design. Applicants should include a copy of an organizational chart showing how the organization operates, including who manages the finances, how the organization manages subawards if there are any, and the management of the project proposed for funding. This should be a separate attachment labeled as organizational chart. This will not be counted in your 30-page limit unless you include it in your proposal narrative. So it's best that you just reference it and then attach it separately. The plan for collecting performance measures should include how you plan to collect the data. OJP will require each successful applicant to submit regular performance data that demonstrates the results of the work carried out under the award. Further guidance on the post-award submission process of this information will be provided at a later date if you are selected for an award. Applicants are not required to submit performance measurement data with their application. We just need you to demonstrate your understanding of performance data reporting requirements. There is a link here and a link in the solicitation that shows the list of specific performance measure questions for this solicitation. Again, I want to emphasize that you do not need to submit any performance measure data with your application. Just look at the performance measures as it relates to this program and provide a brief explanation on how you plan to address that which will be required through the performance measures page. Budget worksheet and narrative. This is a Just Grants web-based budget form. The budget narrative should thoroughly and clearly describe every category of expense listed in the budget detail worksheet. Under each category, there is a narrative section to detail what these costs will be used for. This description must be complete, cost-effective, and allowable. There are links to the DOJ Financial Resource Guide that explains what we fund, what we will not, and what you have to work with your program manager on for additional questions. But we are looking for reasonable, allocable, and necessary for project activities. Remember, successful applicants are expected to participate in an up to 3-day cross-site meeting in each year of the project. So please remember to budget for as many as 3 representatives to travel to attend this meeting. And I urge you to refer to the OJP Grant Application Resource Guide to help with budget preparation and submission. Here are some additional forms that need to be included with your application. Some of these may not be applicable to you, but just be sure to refer back to the solicitation and the OJP Grant Application Resource Guide for more details about each one of these items. Here are some additional items that also should be included with your application, some of which we have already touched on. And so these include your timeline, letters of support, Again, if you are submitting a joint application as described under eligibility, applicants should provide signed and dated letters of support or MOUs for all those key partners. You should also include position descriptions outlining roles and responsibilities for all key personnel, resumes of all key personnel, as well as the planning team document that outlines your multidisciplinary team of stakeholders. The Department of Justice is committed to advancing work that promotes civil rights, increases access to justice, supports crime victims, protects the public from crime and evolving threats, and builds trust between law enforcement and the community. In FY 2021, OJP will give priority consideration in award decisions to applications that demonstrate ways in which their projects will advance one or more of those areas. In addition, OJP will give priority consideration to applications that propose to implement community violence intervention or CVI strategies within their programming, as well as applications that demonstrate that the individuals who are intended to benefit from the requested grant reside in high poverty areas or persistent poverty counties. Please note, receipt of priority consideration does not guarantee that an application will be funded, nor will the failure to receive priority consideration necessarily mean that an application will not be funded. Applicants will submit the priority areas information by uploading the document or documents as an attachment in JustGrants. Please be sure to label each attachment as appropriate. So to receive priority consideration for advancing one or more of the department's priorities, the applicant must provide a sufficient narrative explanation that specifies how the project will advance the promotion of civil rights, access to justice, support to crime victims, protecting the public from crime and evolving threats, or building trust between law enforcement and the community. To receive priority consideration under the CVI priority, the applicant must provide a sufficient narrative explanation that describes one or more specific CVI strategies that will be implemented with funding and how they will be targeted to reduce violence. To receive priority consideration under the poverty priority, the applicant must provide information to demonstrate that the individuals who are intended to benefit from the requested grant reside in high poverty areas or persistent poverty counties. Selection process. Applicants that meet the basic minimum requirements, which include submitting a proposal abstract, proposal narrative, and your budget worksheet and budget narrative, will be evaluated by peer reviewers using the following criteria. So the description of issue section is worth 20%, where peer reviewers will evaluate your understanding of the program and issue to be addressed. Project design and implementation is worth 35%. Peer reviewers will evaluate the adequacy of the proposal, including the goals, objectives, timelines, milestones, and deliverables. Capabilities and competencies is worth 25%, and you'll be evaluated on your administrative and technical capacity to successfully accomplish the goals and objectives of the program. Your plan for collecting the data is worth 10%, and you'll be evaluated on your understanding of the performance data reporting requirements and your plan for collecting the required data. And the budget is worth 10%, and your budget will be evaluated for completeness, cost effectiveness, and allowability. OJP is committed to ensuring a fair and open process for awarding grants. OJJDP reviews the application to make sure that the information presented is reasonable, understandable, measurable, and achievable, as well as consistent and in line with the solicitation. Peer reviewers will review the applications submitted under the solicitation that meet basic minimum requirements. OJJDP may use internal peer reviewers, external peer reviewers, or a combination of both to review the applications. Like I said earlier in this webinar, OJP funding applicants will have 2 deadlines to meet when submitting their application. So please save those dates. The SF-424 form and the SF-LLL or lobbying form needs to be submitted in grants.gov by June 22nd. And the full application, including all of your attachments, need to be submitted in Just Grants on or by July 6th. If you are not registered for grants.gov, please do so as soon as possible, as the registration process can take some time. OJP urges applicants to submit applications at least 72 hours prior to the application due date to allow time for you to receive validation messages or rejection notifications from grants.gov and to correct in a timely fashion any problems that may have caused a rejection notification. Every organization that applies needs to have a DUNS number, and if you do not have one, you should get one by calling Dun & Bradstreet. Here's their contact information. Applicants must also register with the System of Award Management database and confirm the organization's SAM number. SAM registration procedures can be accessed at that website, sam.gov. OJJDP strongly encourages all prospective applicants to sign up for grants.gov email notifications regarding the solicitation. If the solicitation is modified, individuals who sign up with grants.gov for updates will automatically be notified. Late applications are not accepted unless there is a problem with grants.gov, sam.gov, or Just Grants on OJJDP's end. A problem on the applicant side, such as a lack of a DUNS number, will not result in a waiver to submit late. So here is the contact information for grants.gov. If you need any technical assistance with submitting your SF-424 or SF-LLL, please give them a call or email. They are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, except for federal holidays. Same with if you have any issues submitting your actual application and all of your attachments. This is the contact information for Just Grants Service Desk, and they have set hours as well. Here are some additional resources to assist you that include grant writing tips and evidence-based practices. The resources that I have here provide an overview across all of our criminal and juvenile justice issues of evidence-based practices that you might want to consider if you haven't. So the OJJDP Model Programs Guide contains information about evidence-based juvenile justice and youth prevention, intervention, and reentry programs. If you are not familiar with these, please do use them. There are some tremendous resources available through our Model Program Guide, and definitely share with your stakeholders. It is a resource for practitioners and communities about what works, promising practices, and most importantly, what does not work. The OJP crimesolutions.gov is another helpful resource that uses rigorous research to inform practitioners and policymakers about what works in criminal justice, juvenile justice, and crime victim services. This is not just focused on youth violence prevention or intervention. This is OJP, so it is broad in terms of research in adult, youth, juvenile, and criminal issues. Again, if you are not familiar with Crime Solutions, I advise you to use this as a resource as well. Again, the What Works Clearinghouse, this one is specifically for our school-based programs. If you are looking to do a school-based violence prevention program, the Clearinghouse includes research on different programs, products, practices, and policies in helping you make evidence-based decisions. I hope these resources are helpful to you, not only for your application to the solicitation, but just in the overall daily work that you are doing. As always, we encourage you to stay connected to OJJDP news, programs, and resources through our various media platforms that are listed here. So Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, JuvJust, and our newsletter. And so that is all from me. So I guess we can go into the question and answer session now, and maybe start with the questions that we received in advance.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Leonora. And just as a reminder to the audience today, any additional questions that were not answered today, please note that we are encouraging you to please send in those questions to the response center. The information is up on the current slide. I'm also going to have my co-host to place that information for the response center in the chat for those who may be listening in or unable to view the presentation today. So that being said, the first question for you, Leonora, for our pre-submitted questions, what are the main changes in this version of the solicitation as compared to the one previously submitted?
Okay, thank you, William. So like I stated earlier in the webinar, there's been a huge shift in priority in community violence intervention and youth violence reduction. So a lot of the language that was changed in this revised solicitation was made to really align with that focus in mind and support communities in implementing more prevention and intervention strategies to support children exposed to violence, as well as provide more training and TA through the TTA provider that is focused on exposure to violence and youth violence prevention and intervention. So I strongly encourage you to thoroughly read the solicitation so you can kind of see the breakdown of everything. However, just to give you a quick rundown of the specific changes, they include the funding amount for Category 1. It was changed to $930,000. There is actually no MOU requirement with a law enforcement agency for Category 1 applicants. There were changes in what the funding can be used for, and specifically adding in the development and enhance and implement community violence intervention strategies for under Category 1. There were changes in some of the deliverables between the Category 1 and Category 2. And there were changes to the OJP priority areas. So definitely I encourage you to really thoroughly read the solicitation and mark those changes.
Excellent. All right. Next pre-submitted question here. Is this grant opportunity geared towards communities that are seeking to develop a new initiative, or can this be used for existing programs?
Okay, so it can be used for either. Funding under this program can be used to enhance and or develop supportive services for children exposed to violence, and to develop, enhance, and implement community violence intervention strategies. So this program development and resource allocation decision by interested applicants should be based on currently available resources to your jurisdiction and gaps in services.
Leonora, we did get several questions that came in around eligibility. So can you go over eligibility again?
Yep. Eligible applicants are limited to city or township government, county government, independent school districts, Native American tribal governments that are federally recognized, as well as Native American tribal organizations other than federally recognized tribal governments. Also, nonprofits having a 501c3 status with the IRS or not having a 501c3 status with the IRS. Also, private institutions of higher education, public and state-controlled institutions of higher education, as well as state government.
Awesome, thank you. Are sample applications from previously funded projects available?
For examples of previously funded awards, I suggest you go to our OJJDP homepage and click on the funding tab and then click on awards. And there's a list of funded projects, and you can look at everything funded previously to give you a good sense of what we're looking for. So in FY 2019, we funded programs to support a comprehensive effort to address youth violence and victimization through implementing prevention, intervention, and accountability efforts in a school-based setting. And then in FY 20, the solicitation was similar to our current one. We're supporting programming and services to children exposed to violence in homes, schools, and communities.
All right. In light of the pandemic, would this support virtual interventions? Also, is OJJDP offering us TA on this?
So OJJDP has been very understanding to programs during this time period, as many programs have had to adjust and pivot their programming to support a more virtual environment. We do expect Category 1 grantees to work closely with the training and TA provider throughout the grant period for any assistance they may need in their programming, especially in light of the fact that we are still in a pandemic.
Thank you. And we'll go over the last few questions here before we get into some of our live submitted questions. So the first one here, pre-submitted, is the funding $930,000 per year for the 3 years, or $930,000 total over the 3 years for Category 1, and this same question for Category 2?
Okay, so I mentioned this earlier, but it's really important to state this again, that a Category 1 applicant should apply for funding up to $930,000 across the 36-month period, 36-month award. Same with Category 2. It's $500,000 across the 36-month award, not per year.
Thank you for that clarification. And then, is there a match requirement for this funding?
No, this solicitation does not require a match for either category. However, if a successful application proposes a voluntary match amount and OJP approves the budget, that total match amount is incorporated into the approved budget and becomes mandatory and subject to audit.
Okay. And will OJJDP offer this solicitation in fiscal year 2022?
So it's too soon to know what the FY 2022 budget will include. However, interest in solicitations is definitely a consideration. So the best resource to identify plans for FY 22 when they become available is our OJP's Funding Resource Center.
Great. And let's see, the next question that we have here: how will I be notified if my agency is selected to receive an award?
So both the point of contact and the authorizing official listed on the grant application will receive an email award notification, which will provide further information on procedures for receiving funds. Applicants receiving an award should be notified by September 30th.
Great. And the, I guess, antithesis, so the opposite end of the spectrum for that question, Leonora, would be: how will I be notified if my agency is not selected to receive an award?
So same thing, both the point of contact and the authorizing official that's listed in the grant application will receive an email notification and summary of peer reviewer comments, and that should be sent out by October 30th.
Okay, great. So that concludes some of our pre-submitted questions, and then we do have a few live questions. Again, to our audience, we've taken in all of your questions. We're in the process of sorting them through. Thank you all for submitting those. I'll repeat this again. If we do not get a chance to get to your question today, please submit your question to the NCJRS Response Center. That information is indeed located here on the slide, and my co-host is also posting that information there inside of the chat there for audience members. So, Leonora, the first live submitted question that we have, we're first going to go ahead and start with a couple of more eligibility-related questions that we had to come in. Someone asked, can the funding be used to provide supportive services to children of incarcerated parents and family members?
So the funding is used to provide supportive services for children that are exposed to violence. But I suggest, if you want more details on that, I suggest sending in your question to the response center so that we can do a little more research on that. But the solicitation explicitly states that this funding is to be used to enhance and or develop supportive services for children exposed to violence.
Okay, thank you. In the line of eligibility, it looks like we had a couple of questions, Leonora, come in around the age qualifications for participants in this program. It looks like people wanted to maybe get a definition of the age range for children, or what the age range is for participants for respective programs.
So direct services, if you are a Category 1 applicant, you are, and you're providing direct services, the age is 17 and younger. It cannot be, your services cannot be targeted to youth that are 18 and older.
Great, thank you. And then, let's see, this may be a little bit of a nuanced question here, but I'll try to clarify it a little bit. Can the grant become a part of another victim service program, or if the client served for each funding source have to be kept separate, a separate program for outputs and outcomes? So it sounds like they want maybe clarification on if people involved in this particular solicitation can come from another victim service program, or if they have to be kept separate.
I suggest submitting that question to the response center so that we can do more research on that. Thank you.
Okay, great. So now, next set of questions here, Leonora, we're going to go over. It looks like this is going more so into the clarification of category type, or even the clarification of some of the definitions in the category. So it says for Category 2, does technical assistance for Category 1 mean we only provide technical assistance to Category 1 awardees, or do entities/sites that match the Category 1 description?
No, so the Category 2 funded TTA provider is providing training in TA specifically for our Category 1 funded site.
Okay, great. Thank you. Someone asked if Category 2 applicants should also complete the documentation of advancing DOJ priorities and the documentation of community violence intervention strategies narrative documents.
So you can if you want to receive priority consideration, but again, those are optional. It's not a requirement.
Okay, great. Let's see. Next is going into some more of the clarification. Let's see, someone asked, do you have any guidelines of how large you expect the target population to be?
There is no specific requirement on that, on the number of children you have to serve, and there's no requirement on the actual population size of your jurisdiction.
Okay. Let's see. Someone asked about the cross-site meeting that was mentioned, Leonora, and they wanted to know where the site meeting is to be held, the location.
So it would be in Washington, D.C. So when you're doing your budget, just budget to travel to D.C.
Okay. And actually, that was part of the next question there too, Leonora. They asked if they should budget for DC. So thank you for answering that. Let's see. How often are these grants awarded? And I believe we did go over the fiscal years for folks in regards to when these are released. My colleague and my co-host put in the chat, or will put in the chat shortly, the OJJDP.gov/funding page. That's the resources that, again, we encourage folks to please go and look on OJJDP's website. They do indeed keep up to date with all of the fiscal year funds that have been released or and that have come out. Any additional advisement around that, Leonora, for as far as the number of how often the awards are awarded?
No, what you said was correct. And again, it's too soon, like I said earlier, to kind of know what the FY 2022 budget will include. So just keep looking at the OJP's Funding Resource Center.
Great. And yes, again, for folks in there, if you're looking in the chat, my co-host did put that page that takes you directly to that funding page there where you can take a look at it. I would suggest folks maybe bookmark it and just continue to kind of check it periodically, and that has the latest and greatest information there. Let's see. This may be a nuanced question here, but I'll ask it for you, Leonora. Can the grant be co-written with Juvenile Hall?
Juvenile. Whoever asked that question, can you please send that one to the response center as well? Yeah, so we can get more information on that.
And again, to the audience members, please note that the response center information is indeed up on this location here, on the slide here, and also it's in the chat. Let's see, for the link for the slides. Leonora, if you don't mind, really quickly, I'm going to take over the presentation here, so I can go here, and I'm going to do the file transfer again. So for those who had questions about accessing the PDF for today's web event, I put that in the very beginning, but I do understand that folks may have come in a little late on today's solicitation. So I'm putting the PDF back up for folks. So you should see a box that comes up on your screen, and it will show here a file share document or a PDF where you can access the PDF that has clickable links inside of there where you can click your any of the resources that were shown for today. And then also finally note that my colleague has indeed put the Google Drive where you can access the PDF as well there. If you have an issue with clicking on that link there, you can simply just copy and paste it into a browser, and then from there you should be able to access the document there. Okay. Let's see, someone sent me a direct message earlier, Leonora, about the recording. I mentioned it earlier again. I'll just say it again for folks. Yes, this web event is being recorded. It may be available on OJJDP's website, given that it's okay to post, but we are recording today's web event, so please be mindful of that. Okay. Yeah, sure. You're welcome. People are saying thank you to me, Leonora, for sharing that. No problem. All right, let's see. Let's see. Does this pertain to this grant solicitation? There's another grant with the title. Leonora, yeah, you mentioned this earlier. Did you want to speak again on the difference between this solicitation and maybe the one came out earlier? It looks like someone came in and wanted to kind of get that confirmation of the difference between this one and the one that was released. before.
Yep. Yeah, sure. So I mentioned a lot of the language that was changed in this revised solicitation was really made to align with this shift in priority on community violence intervention and youth violence reduction. So I encourage everyone, again, to really thoroughly read the solicitation. But again, I'll provide another breakdown of everything that was kind of changed in terms of the funding amount for Category 1. That was reduced to $930,000. For this solicitation, there is no MOU requirement with a law enforcement agency for Category 1 applicants. There was also changes in what the funding can be used for. In terms for like Category 1, we added you can use the funding to develop and enhance and implement community violence intervention strategies, as well as there were changes in some of the deliverables for Category 1 and Category 2. And then lastly, there was changes in the OJP priority areas.
Okay, thank you. For our audience members out there, it looks like some people may have sent questions directly to me. And so, again, we want you to send the questions into all panelists. Again, you would go to the chat and you would select all panelists or everyone to send your question. Any technical related questions, like if you're having trouble with audio or anything like that, then you would send that directly to me. But please, any questions that you have related to the solicitation, send to all panelists or everyone. So, Leonor, I'm going to try to find, I think there were maybe one or two questions that were sent directly to me that I'm trying to kind of search through and undo here. It looks like one person asked about a ramp-up period. Is there a ramp-up period or planning period allowed for program/project startup?
It's not explicitly stated in the solicitation, but typically, like some programs do, like in the use like the first couple of months for planning, and like if they don't have that multidisciplinary team of stakeholders together, they're working to like get that up and running. But that's where you would really work with the TA provider as well, because the TA provider is required to come up with TA plans for all the sites within the first 4 months of the grant cycle. So hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And thank you to our audience who's continued to submit questions here. Again, I'm kind of scrolling up and just sorting through maybe some questions that were submitted directly to me. Again, if you have questions, send them in to all panelists or everyone so that we can capture them. Again, I'll repeat for folks who may have came in a little late. Indeed, recording this web event, and it may be available on OJJDP's multimedia page, so you can continue to, inside of the file share that I've provided there is a link to that OJJDP website or location to their multimedia page where you can view their events, so you can check there to see if the recording for this is available at that time. All right, let's see. We shared the link there for folks. And again, I am sharing the PowerPoint to individuals again. Let's see. What if we are proposing programming that would be implemented across multiple sites? Any advisement on that, Leonora, about implementation of the program across multiple sites?
I would send that question to the response center. I'm sure that would be fine. You know, you're working in your local communities to implement this, the programs, but just to confirm, just send that question to the response center so I can get a better response. Okay,
thank you. Just letting folks know, we're coming up to And again, any questions that did not get answered, please send those over to the response center, and the information is up on the slide here. It looks like we had a couple of questions that came in regarding to MOUs, Leonora. Did you want to maybe broadly go back over those MOU requirements? Some of the questions were asked about if there no requirement for an MOU from a law enforcement agency, or is there a requirement to involve law enforcement in any capacity in the proposed programming? And another question about the MOU they asked is basically, if it's a joint application, does the application require a MOU?
So, so that was one of the changes with this solicitation. For Category 1 applicants, there is no MOU requirement with a law enforcement agency, no MOU requirement. If you are submitting a joint application, then you will need to submit letters of support or MOUs with your partners that you're doing the project with. So in that capacity, you would need a letter of support or MOU. However, there is no requirement to have an MOU with a law enforcement agency to be eligible for this program.
This may be a very nuanced question again, Leonora, but someone mentioned that they have a CTAS-2 grant ending this year in September, and a expiring CTSA-9 ending this year. They want to know if they're eligible if they have these current grants that are for the current year but are ending later this year, if they're eligible to apply.
Oh, yes, if you are in one of the lists under eligibility, like a nonprofit with a 501c3 or without, or a state and county government, everything that's listed under eligibility, if you qualify for one of those, then you are eligible. It doesn't matter if you have another grant.
Okay, great. And again, just a reminder to the audience that if you would like to get access to any of the items that we've provided, including the PowerPoint, please notice that we do have the file available for download, and then we have a Google folder that you can access and get access to this document if you're unable to access it there. Any other items that are being requested for today's web event, please be sure to reach out to OJJDP TTA at usdoj.gov in regards to any materials related to today's webinar. I'll ask my co-host to put in the OJJDP TTA help desk. You can go there if you want to if you have any questions related to any materials received related to this webinar or any other solicitation webinars in the past. You can contact the OJJDP TTA help desk. However, questions related to today's solicitation, specifically today's solicitation, you will send those to NCJRS, the response center, and that's the information here on this slide. I hope that helped to clarify individuals who had that question around any materials related to this webinar or past webinars that you may find on that OJJDP multimedia website. So thank you for that, everyone. Okay, let's see. There is a question, Leonora, and I want to maybe ask it from one of the pre-submitted questions because it came in directly to me, but I feel like it was a question that was submitted beforehand. And I wanted to see if you were fine with maybe going over that because it looked like they submitted it around there. It's the equivalent to question, I believe, let's see, number 6 that came in. What are specific program implementation strategies, for example, evidence-based models to address violence in communities, recommended home visitor and school-based programs, trauma screenings, and tools, requests for domestic violence, resources. So it looks like that question that came in, a couple of questions that came in was around that pre-submitted question number 6 there.
Okay. Yeah, so I can't get into like specifics on what programs you should or should not be doing because, you know, you are dealing with your own local issues and problems, and this is such like a broad category, children exposed to violence in homes, schools, and communities. However, if you want to learn more about best practices in the field, then I definitely urge you to refer to the resources that I mentioned earlier. So that OJJDP Model Programs Guide, which contains information about the evidence-based juvenile justice and youth prevention, intervention, and reentry programs. Also go to ojpcrimesolutions.gov that uses rigorous research to inform practitioners and policymakers about what works and what doesn't work. And then there's also the What Works Clearinghouse, which is especially targeted for school-based violence prevention programs. So I definitely urge you to take a look at those resources.
Great, thank you, Leonora, and that actually addressed several questions that we've seen to come in there, so I appreciate you providing that additional detail there. Right, okay. Well, it looks like there are no additional questions coming in, so at this time, I would like to, Leonora, pass it over to you just for any last minute words before we conclude today's webinar.
No, I just want to thank everyone for all of your wonderful questions and spending this like hour with us to talk about the solicitation and the application requirements. Again, if you have any additional questions, specifically programmatic questions or anything, please send them to the Response Center and we will get those answered to you.
Great, perfect. Thank you very much. And again, thank you to our audience that has joined us for today. Before I let you go, we just have a few items that we want to cover to wrap up. Remember this, Grant, or please keep note that Ojdp is accepting applications through Just Grant system. This was mentioned during the presentation, but the link is also conveniently available for you all here. Again, when you download the item, you'll see that those links are clickable in the PDF that we've provided. If you'd like to get in contact with OJJDP's INTAC, here's our contact information here. We encourage you to please sign up for our listserv or go to our Facebook page to learn more about upcoming trainings and resources that we have. Also note that the help desk, or to get in contact with the help desk, JuveJust, or any upcoming events, we have that information on this slide. Again, the help desk, you can contact us for any related materials to any previous web events that you've seen on the OJJDP multimedia site. If you'd like to learn more about OJJDP, go to the URL that's located here, ojjdp.ojp.gov, to learn more about OJJDP. Also sign up for the OJJDP listserv, which is called JuveJust. It was mentioned during today's presentation, but we also have a link here where you can click on that and become a member of that listserv and sign up. And also on OJP's upcoming events, be sure to go to their website to check out their events that are coming up soon. Do you have a training or technical assistance need? Well, if so, we ask for you to submit a request for help via the OJJDP TTA 360 platform. You can access that platform through the URL here. As I mentioned at the beginning, past web events are archived on OJJDP's multimedia page. If you would like to get any supporting materials related to any of those items, you would contact the OJJDP TTA help desk. And finally, we have a few upcoming events that we would love for you all to join us. Tomorrow we have another solicitation webinar. This one focuses on comprehensive youth violence prevention and reduction programs. That is tomorrow at 2 o'clock Eastern Time. We also have a webinar coming up on Wednesday on expunging juvenile records, misconceptions, collateral consequences, and emerging practices. That webinar is very popular, so please be sure to go in and sign up for that webinar as soon as you can to receive very wonderful information around that particular topic. And then finally, we have, again, more solicitations that are indeed available and that have recently been released. Again, you can locate these on that link that was provided in the chat there on OJJDP's webpage. But we have a Title II solicitation webinar set for June the 15th and the 17th. Please note that this web event is for the same title, or excuse me, area of content for Title II. However, it's been split up into two different web events. One is going to be focused on programmatic, and then the second is focused on compliance. So be sure to sign up and register for each of those solicitation webinars. All right, doing a quick poll question for those who are left over. This poll, we basically want to know, how do you plan to apply the information that you've learned from today's web event? Please note that this particular poll question is multiple select, meaning you can go in and you can actually select multiple options here for this poll question. And again, we just basically want to know, how do you plan to apply the information that you've learned for this particular web event? And note that you have multiple selections that you could choose from here for this option. I'm going to go ahead and leave this up for folks to fill out for the next few minutes. But again, thank you all for joining today's web event. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you, Leonora. Take care.
Thank you.